What is the issue, and this is a sad fact, is that 1 in every 9 girls in the United States will be sexually assaulted or abused by the time she's 18. And 1 out of every 3 of those cases, the perpetrator is actually a family member. And so we live in a culture of denial, and that's changing now with so many women coming out about the fact that they've been sexually harassed in the workplace. So what I think the Girl Scouts are trying to do is open up the conversation as to how do we teach girls to have boundaries and families to have better boundaries around their girls.
Well, you know, liberals are the great huggers. It's us up.
Why conservatives don't hug? Republicans don't hug?
We're supposed to be uptight, and we don't. Liberals hug.
Don't you age out of it? I mean, he's 65 years old. Isn't there a point in a man's life when he's just too tired to sexually harass? No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I understand your question. The thing is that we can't come up with a sex offender profile. That's the one thing that we're having a hard time doing in the psychological community, because people who commit these crimes defy everything that we understand. It doesn't matter what age, what socioeconomic class. We can't quite pin down why people do this. The only thing that we do know is that the people who do commit sex crimes, 95% of them are men. So the question for me becomes, if 1 out of every 6 women in her lifetime is going to be a victim of sexual assault or rape, and 95% of the people who are the criminal offenders are men, how many men are getting away with this kind of behavior that we're not talking about? And as a society, are we complicit by not having some sort of larger understanding or system in place to actually prosecute people who do this?
How do you treat someone that has stress about Donald Trump's presidency? Do they meditate? Do they do yoga? Do they have mantras that they repeat when he speaks on television?
You know, Jesse, it's really important not to belittle this point.
I'm not belittling at all. I'm wondering what the tools that you give them to reduce their
practical measures, but you have to understand that when people are stressed in our society, we're not just facing an opiate epidemic in this country, we're facing a massive mental health crisis. And it cannot be said enough. 1 out of every 6 Americans in this country is on psychiatric medication. 1 out of every 4 women is on psychiatric medication. $210 billion in lost income.
So if you could just clarify the difference between a sex addict and a sexual predator, and why is Harvey Weinstein an addict, not a predator?
Well, a sexual addict would be someone who uses sex a lot to get comfort, right? They have an addiction to, let's say, pornography or looking at certain images. Someone who's a sexual perpetrator actually acts upon their sexual fantasies and breaks the law.
Well, that seems like a great distinction. I mean, I agree with you. So why is he in rehab, since he's clearly in the latter category?
Well, that was the choice that he made, right? He said that what he was going to do to repent for the things that he has done is to go to rehab. The question is whether or not...
So that's why I'm a little bit confused.
I don't think it's being ignored. I think what we're seeing, though, in the federal study and what's come out in terms of the Census Bureau is that if 1.4 million people don't identify with the gender marker that they were given at birth, we have to take note of that and say what's going on, that there's a fluidity about gender and it's not necessarily rooted in biology.
Why does that not extend to race?
It isn't about behaving in a presidential manner, it's about humanity.
Well, and also for me, in terms of looking at his mental health, which I can't totally commentate on, I've obviously never treated him in my office. He's free to call me if he needs one, because I think he does. But how is it that they're able to commit these crimes without thinking that there's going to be some moral and huge social implications, considering the fact that they're men with so much power and they have so much visible exposure?
Right. Well,
Somebody thinks it's a good idea.
Right. Well, under the U.S. Constitution, under the 8th Amendment, we must provide prisoners with the same life-saving medical treatment that we provide free citizens with.
Life-saving.
Life-saving. So the medical community, the consensus among the medical community is that this surgery is life-saving for prisoners, despite what people think. Right away, removed him from the home and said, okay, he needs to see a therapist. A therapist is a mandated reporter across America. Now, the interesting thing about that is, for parents, it absolves you in a way. The system is there to protect the entire family, right? The victims, the perpetrator, and the parents. So if then all of a sudden you're discharging the child to a therapist, it's on the therapist to do what they need to do according to the law. And that might unburden a parent. And if the child already doesn't like to have parties, there's obviously extreme shyness or perhaps some social anxiety disorder or
well, no, that was
defined
never mentioned
disorder.
in the column. And I agree with you, Jamie. They never would have.
No, she's not writing to Miss Manners if her child has actual social anxiety. It's not an issue then.
But she obviously has some sort of social issue if she doesn't want to have
Either
a party.
that, or do you think the parents are just, the kid might just keep getting her way?
Yeah.
Well, even if that's the case, you can use this as an opportunity for the family to start to communicate a little bit better with each other.
Wouldn't you just be embarrassed, though, if your child, if you invited all these people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You totally would be embarrassed. But the idea now is, how do you handle a situation like that once it's occurred?
Right.
Right. And so you can use it as an opportunity.
Maybe the problem is the parents are writing Miss Manners and not just doing the right thing and saying, yes, you need to return the gifts.
Or saying, like, look, we obviously, need to send an email out to family members and hope that they're sympathetic and understand the situation. Yeah. And then actually sit down with the child and try to start to communicate about what happened and how they can. About poverty, we talk about the economy and how it affects people, but we don't actually talk about how people relate to their money psychologically. I think your question's a great one. I think we're still trying to understand as a society what to do in these cases. In prisons, if you identify as a woman, but you're housed in a male prison system, you're 13 times more likely to be raped than someone from the general population in prison. So again, it's a very complicated question, because what do we do with people who identify as a woman, but are housed in a male system, and vice versa?
And quickly, Dr. Loudon, what do you do with people like that?
And I love listening to people's stories. In my job, when people come into my office, I get to ask questions like, did you have that affair? Are you pregnant? I even sometimes shop for boys online with my patients, I'm going to admit it, on Tinder. I do, because who's better at picking out your boyfriend than your therapist? Yeah, I think this is one of the least controversial plans in American education. Every piece of research that we have coming out of academic institutions or think tanks has always agreed that parental involvement in student education is key for students to thrive and have academic success.
So there's a few points here we want to get out. Each report card.
Census Bureau stated that in 2014, 50% of women between the ages of 15 and 44 are deciding not to have children. That's up 50% since 2012. This was even a surprising statistic for me to learn. And I
think that they all need to be in therapy.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Yes.
You do?
Yes, obviously, yeah. I mean, the thing is that the treatment for what these girls went through would be different than what the perpetrator went through, and then obviously the ramifications just keep going outward, right? So having family therapy and individual therapy for all of the people involved is massively important.
Even 14 kids, even the kids who weren't involved.
Oh yeah, because look at what they're going to face going forward, just publicly, knowing that this has happened, and some of the children are still quite small. So how do they begin to make sense of this? And one of the ways that we do make sense of trauma that happens in a family is by talking about it. This whole big pumpkin spice latte controversy. So this group Ultraviolet came out, which is a feminist organization, and said that they want people to boycott buying pumpkin spice lattes in branches that are located in retail locations that are in Trump Tower, essentially in Midtown Manhattan.
Right. I mean, you often hear people say the activist left is a bunch of silly, out-of-touch rich people, and this kind of gives them ammo for that argument. I mean, in a country with, serious unemployment, massive drug problems, huge levels of consumer debt, here are the entitled feminists of Ultraviolet getting mad at Starbucks.
And if parents don't have a say in this could be a problem, especially medically for these young girls.
Well, I think that the language that is being used is that you're saying that parents don't have a say in it. Parents absolutely do. If parents have an open relationship with their children, but if they have an open relationship with their children that they've established already, then the child can go to the parent and tell the parent they're thinking of becoming sexually active, and the parent can educate them at home. The point of having the clinics actually in school is that when that relationship isn't happening in the home, the child has a place to go in order to protect herself sexually.
Okay. If we actually attempt to make even the most innocent physical contact something that has to be patrolled and policed, we risk doing to the general population what the Queen did to Prince Charles.
Oh, no, I'm not. Because we're just having a conversation here. And the conversation that follows then is exactly the question that you just asked. How do we cultivate healthy intimacy in families? How do we cultivate appropriate touching and affection? Affection's important. It's the way we thrive. It's part of the reasons we thrive as humans.
Let me ask you about Target, because this is something interesting going around. The retailer has just announced that Friday it will phase out gender-based signage in some departments, toys and bedding. What do you think?
I think the most important thing for children is that they explore across gender. Everything about that we've learned with research is that we need children to be curious in order to start the domino effect of learning. God knows which one of these children have the cure for cancer inside of them or are going to be the next president. The more they explore across neutral, gender neutral aisles, the better we are off as a society.